G'day, this is Matt, and we're continuing our Wednesday discussions about stuff that's in the newspaper that we need to interpret from the context of the Bible, pinching Karl Barth's quote that we had up the top there. And today I'm going to talk about something that's quite specific to Hobart, but is also generally true. And it's about the whole thing of the arts. And here in Hobart right now, we have what we call dark MOFO. We don't call it, the organisers call it dark MOFO. And it's an interesting arts festival. It is specifically designed to explore issues of life and death and darkness and light and that kind of thing. But they use, from my perspective, the organisers use religion and particularly Christianity as a bit of a punching bag, but more than that, as a way to market the arts festival. So, for instance, this year, at one of the functions, they gave away 666 beers as a very intentional strategy to get Christians annoyed, actually. I don't. My response to that was more to laugh, because it's fairly blatant, and it wasn't a new thing. Steve Jobs, of course, marketed the first Apple computer for $666.66, and it's an interesting way to do it. Each year there seems to have been, with Dark MOFO, a particular artistic exhibit or performance that has got people riled up. Last year it was the upside down crosses. This year the big red crosses are, from a Christian perspective, the right way up. Still though, I want to talk about how do we respond to something like Dark MOFO, and how should we think about the arts? You see, this is the front page of the newspaper from a week or so ago, and the front page says "Still cross at Dark MOFO," and there's the cross the right way up there, but the Australian Christian lobby are saying, you know, that it's still a blasphemous thing, and the Dark MOFO is inherently evil. Kind of is the. Well, I probably should read the exact quote if I can here. Let's see if we can bring it up. Just because they're now the right way up, that doesn't mean they're respectful, Tasmanian Director of the Australian Christian Lobbies, Dan Flynn, says. You know, there's this sort of debate on the front page between the festival organiser, Lee Carmichael, and the Australian Christian Lobby. And the Australian Christian Lobby probably represents one way of engaging with something like Dark MOFO, and from my perspective, I'm always a bit sad when Christians look reactionary, when we look like we are reacting and we're against things. For me, a model, and as the intent of these little conversations on a Wednesday lunchtime is to see if we can take the newspaper and then take the front page, we'll take the front page of the newspaper and look at our Bible and see how do we interpret or how do we react to something like Dark MOFO. One way, I think, of reacting or responding is the similar way that the Apostle Paul reacted or responded to pagan idol worship in the city of Athens. He wandered round Athens, and it actually says in Acts chapter 17, in verse 16, while Paul was waiting for them in Athens, he was greatly distressed to see the city was full of idols. He wandered around and what is interesting about it, he let himself be affected. So I don't think a Christian response is to pretend that some of the dark stuff that comes through the arts is okay. I don't think Paul at any point is saying, oh, this is okay, a city full of idols, let's pretend it's not there. But at the same time, he doesn't then attack people, but rather helps them understand what's behind the longings in their own hearts. What he says, as he then addresses the people of Athens, he says, "People of Athens, I see that in every way you are very religious." What's he doing? He's addressing not the fact that there are idols there, but the impulse that produces the idols. And a Christian understanding is that all people are created in the image of God. Also, all people are pretty screwed up. And that battle, that internal battle we all face, as Solzhenitsyn said, that the line between good and evil isn't between people or between organisations or between countries. It's in every human heart. That's a Christian understanding. But one of the dangers can be, Christians can fall into the trap of thinking the line between good and evil is between those who go to church and those who don't, or those who think like us and those who don't. And that is actually not a Christian way of seeing things. We are all, as the Bible uses the term, we all fall short, or some people say that we're all fallen, is the way the Bible approaches it. So Paul says, I see that you are very religious. He addresses the impulse. And that impulse, again, there's a passage in, or just a verse in Ecclesiastes I keep referencing, because for me it helps me understand myself and everybody else, where it says, God has put eternity in the human heart. There is a part of all of us that's bigger than time and space. And you see at a festival like Dark MOFO, this reaching for a bigger story. People trying to make sense of things. And there are some art exhibits at Dark MOFO that are really quite touching and important. There's one about the Aboriginal people who were killed or lost or missing as you walk through the domain here in Hobart, and it raises really important cultural questions that we need to face. There's also stuff that is just silly. Like there's a building that I think it's called the Demon's Gate or something, and you go in and it's just, I haven't gone in, my mate went in to it, the lines were too long, and I was going to go in and say, why would you call something like that, I forget the name of it, something to do with demons. Anyway, it's just colourful lights and noises, and it really is a very clear attempt to continue to lean into and to offend people from a Christian background. I think a festival like this, and there's also some stuff that is, I think can be quite dangerous. There's an art exhibit that's called a séance. It's not actually a séance, but from a Christian perspective, there are forces you don't want to mess around with, and I think there's some dangerous stuff, there's some stupid stuff, there's actually some good stuff. And as Paul wanders around Athens, he sees all of that, but he looks to the symbols that then help him explain to people what's going on for them. He says, "For as I walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship, I even found an altar with this inscription, 'To an unknown God.' So, you are ignorant of the very thing you worship, and this is what I'm going to proclaim to you." So he looked around and found their symbols, the places where they were reaching for something bigger. And I think a moment like Dark MOFO is a really important opportunity, and it raises important questions. I went for a wander the other day. It was quite an interesting Sunday arvo for us. We went... for the Sunday afternoon, we went and visited the Hillsong Church. They have a 4:30 service, and it was fun to go along and see. I recommend, if you haven't been to Hillsong, there's a kind of approach to church they do so well, and it's very organised, and so we went along there. Then we went from there to walk along what they call the dark path, which is obviously meant to evoke pagan rituals and that kind of thing. But it's just a whole line of burning torches so you walk around and you go from art exhibition to art exhibition. And there are literally thousands of people. It's a real community event. And it's interesting as I'm walking along there and praying and thinking, okay, God, what does it say that all these, literally thousands of people are turning up to this event and going to these art exhibitions and are obviously looking for something. At the very least, they're looking for connection and community, but I think there's more than that. So I do think Dark MOFO is an opportunity for the church to have a long, hard look of itself, because if thousands of people are turning up to something like that and thousands of people are not turning up to church, does that mean possibly we need to do the kind of work that Paul did and look around at the symbols that people are using to express the longings? And I think part of our challenge, and I'm aware I'm talking a bit, but this is an issue that we need to unpack, and it's not a simplistic thing. And often the church tends to move simplistically. We tend to move reactively, and we need to understand the whole thing of symbols. You see, we don't often have space for the real artists amongst us, because artists deal in symbols. And the Western Enlightenment that came through and the way the church has shaped, we boil the gospel down into concepts and into ideas. And Christianity became about a set of ideas that if you believe these set of ideas, then you're in. If you don't believe these ideas, you're out. I am so grateful that God didn't send us a set of ideas, because ultimately, one of the things I learnt from my dad, he'd often say this, that ultimately if you are committed to a set of ideas, the only way you can win is to become a fascist, is to force your ideas on everybody else. And we were talking a bit about this at our home group last night, because it's interesting. Jesus doesn't come and give a 5-point plan. He comes and he tells stories. And the modern person gravitates more to Paul, who unpacks the theology and unpacks Jesus' teaching. But Jesus comes and he uses symbols. It doesn't take much. You look at some of Jesus' words, and he's saying things like the kingdom of God is like a mustard seed. He's telling stories, and often the disciples are going to him saying, I don't get what you're saying. And at least part of the reason he's doing that is so that he doesn't get arrested before his time. But it's also, he's doing that because symbols communicate at a level that is beyond the intellect. And we as the church, particularly the modern Western church, have to create space for the artists to help us communicate in ways that are beyond conceptual. I'm really grateful here in our Lena Valley campus. We've got a bunch of paintings up on the wall by one of our artists here, Isaac Ray. And Isaac tells the story through art of what it means to be a refugee. And we launched this exhibition a number of years ago, or no, when I say a number of years ago, what I actually mean is a number of months ago. And these paintings have evoked significant emotion, but what was important about them, you could get up and there are little explanations of each painting, but he could have got up and explained what it meant to be a refugee. But these paintings of the life of a refugee communicate in a much deeper and richer way what it means to be a refugee in Australia. And they've helped our congregation understand in a much more helpful way the journey and what it means to be a refugee. In some ways, though, this is a more accessible version of art than there are other kinds of arts that are so symbolic, that are so not cognitive, that it's really hard if you've grown up in a Western Enlightenment way of thinking. It's just really hard to relate to them. I don't know if you've met many artists or hung around them. Often they talk in ways that, like, I'm not an artist. I'd love to be, but I'm not. And often real artists who are very creative will talk in ways that don't often make sense to me, but somehow things communicate at a heart level in a way that is not just a set of concepts. It's not just a simplistic way of, it's not just illustrating an idea. There are so many ideas embedded in it that you can't just capture it with a simple sentence. And often artists won't tell you what the art is about because they want you to engage with it, which is all part of it. And I don't think we in the Christian church have had a simple way to create space for artists, which is sad because we do talk a lot about spiritual gifts and that kind of thing. Did you know the first spiritual gift to be mentioned in the Bible is mentioned in Exodus chapter 31, where it says, "See, I've chosen Bezalel, son of Uri, the son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah, and I have filled him with the Spirit of God, with wisdom and understanding, with knowledge and with all kinds of skills, to make artistic designs for work in gold, silver and bronze, to cut and set stones, to work in wood, and to engage in all kinds of crafts." I know I tend to be more a conceptual kind of person, but what I see here is someone who has been gifted by the Holy Spirit to create art, to create craft. And I don't know that many of our churches know what to do with people who are gifted like this. But I think we need them. We need people who will help us think more broadly, who will challenge us. That's why I've been pleasantly, I haven't been surprised, I've just been pleased to see the different responses that the church has had to Dark MOFO this time. That the Hobart Baptist Church has a bit of a confronting scene with a cross and a picture of, it's a big, it's a sculpture, and there's a human figure on the cross covered in a Hessian bag, and really it is evoking this image of, are we covering up? Are we avoiding the truth of who Jesus is? It's kind of the message that's there. And it's a little bit of a confronting one. And it's produced by an artist who isn't just trying to illustrate a point. He's trying to communicate at a level that is more than just an illustration. Down on the waterfront, Helen Devonish is another artist, and she's got an art exhibition down there, which is just fantastic. And in the cathedral, there's another series of exhibitions, and all of these are Christians trying to find ways to do what Paul was doing in Athens, to find a way to, rather than just tell people off for liking things that are not biblical, or rather than react, they're finding ways, they're looking for ways to engage constructively. And I think they're looking for ways to use symbols. And I think this is the journey for us as the church, as we look at what does it mean to grow into, and I think as we find our future, people are sick of people with all the right ideas. People are sick of people who just have a knowledge in their head, and are actually much more interested in people whose words and actions match, and are much more interested in experiences of the transcendent. And I think that's what's coming through with Dark MOFO. Now, I am keen to continue this dialogue, and it's been encouraging to see the way that, generally speaking, the church has been less reactionary and more proactive. But I do think we've got a long way to go in creating real space for the artists amongst us, and allowing ourselves to engage with things that aren't neat and tidy, that aren't like a 5-point plan, but are confusing, bewildering, and challenging. And I think the reason I think this is important is that's exactly what Jesus was about. It's how he communicated. He communicated with pictures and with words, and through actions that were often bewildering and confusing, and still to this day are debated, and people trying to work out what did he actually mean. And I think more and more we need to find ways of communicating like that, and creating space for those amongst us that do communicate that way. So this is This has been another conversation about the front page of the paper and what does it mean to look at the Bible and interpret the newspaper through the lens of the Bible. I appreciate Karl Barton, that quote, and it's something we want to continue to do here at Citywide, and I think generally, it's what the churches are looking to do. How do we engage with culture? And how do we not just be reactionary and seek to move things back to a time where the church had a different place in society, but how do we engage with our society as it is now? And how do we actually productively communicate the heart of the gospel in a way that people can respond to it and understand it and make sense of the longings that are in their own heart, the longings that might be expressed in ways we find offensive, or as Paul found offensive what he saw in Athens, or where we disagree with, but rather than telling people off for the product of those longings, helping people understand those longings in the context of the gospel story. And I think we've got a way to go, don't you? I think at the moment, because of the way we've been shaped, I think we've watered down the gospel to a set of concepts, and we're needing to understand the depth and breadth and power of the gospel in a new way. And I think this season in Hobart is bringing that into focus around the whole question of the arts and dark MOFO. And as I said, I'm pleased. In many ways, I think the church is increasingly finding ways to be proactive, but we've got to make sure we don't get stuck into the reactive negativity that actually distances people from Jesus rather than draws them to Jesus. So thanks for taking the time to listen, and we'll be back. I'm going to be away for a couple of weeks, but as often as we can on a Wednesday, we'll have these kind of discussions where we take a look at what's on the front page of the paper and then open the Bible and see how does the Bible respond to this.